I sat in my own living room, watching my daughter-in-law laugh on the phone while she forgot to serve me dinner. My son just brushed me off. "Dad, stop imagining things." That cut deeper than any knife, but I stayed quiet, because I already had a plan. They thought I was powerless, until the night I swapped her lube for glue, and the firefighters had to pull them apart. Stay with me until the end of this story. It only gets wilder from here. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment the city you're watching from, so I'll know how far my story has reached. The late afternoon sun cast a heavy orange glow over the quiet streets of Houston. But inside the house, the warmth felt distant. The walls seemed to listen as footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Something about the rhythm of those steps had changed. Too light, too hurried, as if they carried secrets. My daughter-in-law's voice followed, hushed, clipped, and always cut short when I drew near. The clatter of her phone snapping shut became the punctuation mark of my suspicions. At dinner, the tension finally found a stage. Plates slid across the table, each portion placed with the kind of care one reserves for guests, except mine. I waited, pretending patience, until the silence grew undeniable. She laughed suddenly, into her phone, not at the table, her head tilted away, eyes flashing with someone else's joy. Only when my son nudged her did she remember me, setting a plate down as if tossing scraps to a stranger. The humiliation burned hotter than the soup in front of me. After the dishes were cleared, I lingered in the living room. The TV flickered with some sitcom laughter that clashed against the mood pressing in on me. I spoke, my voice low, steady. "She's been different lately. Don't you notice?" My son sunk into the couch, sighed heavily. "Dad, you always imagine things. Don't stir drama where there isn't any." His words, casual and dismissive, cut deeper than his wife's neglect. In that moment, it wasn't just her pushing me aside. It was my own flesh and blood closing the door on me. The room shrank around me, leaving no space for the man who had once built this home brick by brick. Later that night, my bedroom felt less like shelter and more like exile. The door, once a symbol of rest, now seemed to seal me off from the heart of my own family. Lying in bed, the memories rushed in, years of sacrifices, overtime shifts, missed holidays, all so my son could have opportunities I never did. And now, all that devotion reduced to suspicion and silence. Betrayal doesn't strike suddenly. It seeps, drop by drop, until the flood can no longer be contained. Morning came heavy, the light in the kitchen harsh and unkind. Coffee hissed in the pot as I moved quietly, hoping routine might calm me. Instead, her voice pierced the stillness. From the corner, her whisper slithered through the air. "He doesn't suspect a thing." The words weren't meant for me, but they found me nonetheless, sharp as glass under bare feet. The spoon in my hand stilled, the coffee forgotten. The casual cruelty of her certainty ignited something deep and unyielding. By dusk, I found myself on the porch, the wooden boards cool beneath my hands. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from the storm rising inside. The cicadas sang their endless song, but even their chorus couldn't drown out the vow forming silently in my chest. If they thought I was blind, if they mistook my silence for weakness, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The night gathered around me, heavy with promises of reckoning. Evening light spilled into the study, casting long shadows across the walls lined with books I'd collected over a lifetime. The silence in that room was heavier than any noise I had endured. For years I had let things slide, convincing myself that patience was strength. But betrayal, I realized, grows wild when it is never pruned. That night, as the house buzzed faintly with the hum of distant conversation, a calm decision took root inside me. Enough was enough. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was colder than that. Steadier, a clarity, sharp as winter air, cut through the fog of hesitation. The face of my daughter-in-law, her sneers and hushed phone calls, danced before me. I thought of my son, blind to her games, dismissing me as though age had dulled my vision. The sting of that memory made my hands curl into fists against the old oak desk. No, this would not pass quietly. I would not sit in the corner of my own home and wait for dignity to be stripped away piece by piece. Betrayal deserved an answer, One she would never forget. My plan was not impulsive. It was deliberate, measured. It would unfold like a slow storm that no one saw until it broke in full force. The opportunity came when the house fell silent later that night. My son had gone out on errands. She was tucked away upstairs. By dawn, I heard her footsteps leave. When I knew the house was empty, I moved. The bathroom smelled faintly of perfume, a sweet and cloying reminder of her presence. Cabinets lined with bottles and tubes spoke of vanity, of careful disguises. I opened the drawer, my fingers trembling, but not from weakness. That trembling was purpose itself flowing through my veins. There it was, the small bottle she thought of as harmless secrecy. My hand hovered for a moment, the weight of the choice pressing in. Then, with calm precision, I replaced it with another. The contents were not of comfort or intimacy, but of binding permanence. A simple swap, yet devastating. The glue was thick, unforgiving. As I sealed the cap and returned it to its place, a strange steadiness filled me. The kind of steadiness a man feels when he reclaims control after being dismissed for far too long. I left the bathroom without a sound, retreating down the hall, heart steady, breath controlled. Outside, the neighborhood continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet storm brewing within these walls. Later that evening, the silence shattered. From the bedroom at the far end of the hall came a muffled laugh, then whispers, then suddenly, a scream. It was raw, panicked. Another voice joined hers, high with disbelief, shuffling, chaos, gasps of shock. I stood in the corridor, invisible yet present, every nerve alive. Her voice rose in desperation. "It won't, oh God, it won't come apart." His groans of pain mixed with hers, frantic and trapped, the sound carved through the air like jagged glass. For once, it wasn't me who felt powerless. I didn't step inside. My presence wasn't needed. Their humiliation was its own punishment. I listened as panic consumed them, as reality clawed away every ounce of secrecy they had tried to protect. Then came the pounding on the door, the flashing lights outside. Neighbors gathered, whispers spreading like wildfire. Firefighters stormed in, their tools clattering against the floor. I stood back, expression calm, watching uniformed men do their work. The lovers, tangled and terrified, became the spectacle of the night. The hiss of whispered gossip from the neighbors outside was louder than any siren. Steel tools pried. Instructions were barked, and under the harsh glow of red lights, they were finally pulled apart. She turned her face away, hair matted, shame written across her trembling lips. The other man kept his eyes low, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I remained on the porch, shadows hiding my satisfaction. No smirk, no outward glee, just a stillness. Inside, however, a fire burned steady. The world thought the humiliation was the worst of it. The neighbors would talk for weeks. My son would face questions. She would carry shame in every step, but I knew better. As the crowd dispersed and the last flashing light faded into the night, I sat back in my chair. The wood creaked beneath me, but my resolve did not. Tonight had been loud, messy, public, yet it was only the prologue. They thought the storm had passed. But for me, this was only the beginning. The house felt strangely hollow after the flashing lights faded into the distance. Midnight crept in, but sleep was nowhere near. From the study, shadows stretched long across the walls, and the muffled sound of raised voices drifted down from upstairs. My son and his wife were arguing, sharp words, broken off midway as though they feared I might hear. There was a bitter calm in my chest. Watching them humiliated had been satisfying. Yes, but the silence afterward whispered something darker. This wasn't finished. That spectacle was only the beginning, the real betrayal. I suspected, ran far deeper than a reckless affair. My hands tightened around the armrests of my chair as I stared at the stack of old papers I'd been sorting earlier. Somewhere in all this, the truth was hiding, and I intended to find it. I went down to the basement storage room. The air smelled of dust and old wood. a quiet tomb where decades of my life had been filed away in cardboard boxes. I pulled open one marked Taxes, 2000s. My eyes skimmed faded ink and brittle receipts until something odd caught my attention, a folder tucked flat against the bottom, unlabeled and too new to belong. Curiosity edged into dread as I opened it. Inside were crisp bank statements, property deeds, and even letters from the county registrar. My name was there, but the signature scrawled across the bottom was not my own. The stroke was clumsy, heavy-handed, a poor imitation of a man they thought too old to notice. Blood pounded in my ears as the pattern emerged. Transfers, sales, slow trickles of money moved behind my back. They had been siphoning my assets piece by piece, disguising theft as business. The betrayal wasn't just in the bedroom, it was in every corner of the life I'd built. I climbed back upstairs with the folder clutched under my arm. Dawn was still hours away, but rage carried me to the kitchen, where I found my son slumped over the table, scrolling on his phone. His eyes lifted, half tired, half defensive. "Dad," he muttered. "Can this wait?" I dropped the folder onto the table, papers spilled out like the guts of a carcass. "Does this look like something that can wait?" He scanned the pages, and instead of shame, I saw irritation flicker across his face. "You're digging through old boxes now. You're making yourself crazy." My voice shook but stayed firm. "These are my accounts, my deeds, forged, and you let her—" He slammed his palm flat on the table. "Enough. Maybe it's time you let go of control. We know what's best now. She's family. I'm family. You don't need to run everything anymore." The words landed heavier than any blow. Betrayal wasn't just hers. It was his. My son, the boy I raised, was standing on the other side of the line. The silence stretched, colder than the night. I gathered the papers back into the folder and walked away. My chest ached, but anger steadied my steps. On the porch, the first gray edge of sunrise was cutting through the horizon. The air was sharp, bracing, almost cleansing. I let the sun climb a little higher before whispering to myself, "They think I'm finished, but this isn't over, not by a long shot." Back in the study, the phone sat waiting. I dialed my lawyer's number with a hand that no longer trembled. My voice, when it came, was calm but iron-willed. "We need to talk," I said. "It's time." The next morning found me in a quiet corner office on the 12th floor of a downtown Houston building. The city buzzed outside, but the hum of traffic seemed far away once the door shut behind me. My lawyer, an old friend named Robert Gaines, adjusted his glasses as I laid out the papers on his mahogany desk, the forged bank statements, the signatures that were clearly not mine, and the property transfers. All of it sat there like poison on display. He leaned forward, scanning each sheet with the steady patience of a man who'd spent 40 years dissecting lies for a living. His brow furrowed, and when he finally looked at me, his voice was low, firm. "If this holds up in court, your daughter-in-law, and even your son, could be in serious legal jeopardy." The words weren't comforting. They were confirmation of what I already feared. The betrayal had sunk deeper than whispers and phone calls. My own blood had taken part in forging my name. A heavy silence filled the office. I could hear only the faint tick of the wall clock, each second hammering home the reality of what had been stolen. We moved to a private meeting room, away from the glass walls and polite chatter of assistants. Robert spread fresh forms across the table, affidavits, petitions, freeze orders. He handed me a pen. It felt heavier than steel, far more lethal than any weapon I had ever known. "This will keep them from moving more assets," he said, guiding me through the documents line by line. "It won't undo what's already gone, but it stops the bleeding." As I pressed the pen against the page, my hand shook, not with age, but with resolve. Each signature was a mark of defiance, a boundary carved in ink. For years I had carried this family on my back. Now I was putting up walls they could not climb. Robert studied me quietly. "You sure you want to go down this road? It won't be a clean fight, They'll push back, hard. I met his gaze, my voice steady. I've buried a wife. I've outlived brothers, friends. If they think I'm too old to fight, they don't know me at all. That evening, I returned home to find the house buzzing with a different kind of energy. My son stormed through the front door, his face flushed, fists clenched. Behind him, his wife hovered, her arms crossed, eyes glinting with practiced tears. "You're ruining this family," he shouted the moment he saw me. "Do you even hear yourself anymore? Lawyers? Freeze orders? What are you trying to prove?" His words hit harder than I cared to admit, but I stood my ground. The evidence sat locked away in Robert's office, but the truth burned bright in my mind. She stepped forward before I could reply. "He's paranoid," she said smoothly, her hand brushing my son's arm as though to calm him. "He's confused. Maybe it's age. Maybe it's grief. But this is cruel, what he's doing." My son's eyes softened at her touch, his anger bending toward her defense. In that moment, I saw it clearly. She had wrapped him tight around her finger, feeding him poison disguised as loyalty. "I raised you to stand on your own," I said quietly. "But standing with her while she robs your father blind, that's not strength, that's surrender." The words hung in the air, sharp and raw. He flinched, but she pulled him close, whispering something I couldn't hear. Later, after the storm of voices had passed, I sat alone at the head of the dining table. The house was still, but the echoes lingered. My eyes drifted to the empty chair at the other end, the chair where my wife once sat. For a moment, the weight of her absence pressed down harder than any betrayal. I rested my hand on the table, whispering to the silence. This fight isn't about dollars. It's about dignity. It's about what we built together, and what I refuse to let them destroy. The hum of the refrigerator was the only answer, but in that quiet, I felt her presence like a steadying hand on my shoulder. Night had fallen by the time I stepped onto the porch. The Texas air was thick with humidity, cicadas buzzing in the trees. I eased into the old rocking chair, letting it creak beneath me. For the first time that day, my chest loosened just enough to breathe. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I answered without looking at the caller ID. A voice, rough, unfamiliar, spoke fast and urgent. "They've already moved something behind your back," the caller warned. "You better look closer. The worst isn't over." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat in the dark, phone still pressed against my ear. The weight of those words sinking deep. The legal papers, the signatures, the confrontation. It had all been just the surface. The game had shifted again, and the stakes were higher than I'd thought. The rocking chair stilled, my eyes fixed on the shadows stretching across the yard. If they thought I was finished, they were about to find out I was just getting started. The evening air in the house was thick, as if it carried the weight of unspoken words. After a long day of silence and reflection, I had just settled into the living room chair when I heard the sharp knock on the front door. I didn't move right away. Something inside told me who it was. When I finally opened the door, my son and his wife stood there, their faces hard with anger. They didn't ask to come in. They barged past me, their voices already raised. "You're meddling again, Dad," my son snapped, pacing across the carpet. "We know what you've been doing, trying to poison the family against us." His wife stood behind him, arms folded, eyes glinting with something colder than anger, something closer to triumph. She added softly, almost sweetly, "It's sad, really. He's just lonely. He doesn't know what he's saying anymore." The way she dismissed me, as though I were some feeble old man who had lost touch with reality, cut deeper than the shouting. The lamp in the corner cast long shadows over their faces, making them appear sharper, crueler. Their accusations lit a fire I had been holding back for weeks. "You want to talk about meddling?" I rose slowly, steadying myself on the armrest. "Let's talk about betrayal, about forged documents, about stolen property." The words hit like stones. For a moment, the room fell silent. My son's eyes darted to hers, then back to me. "Dad, you're tearing this family apart," he shouted, his voice cracking with fury. These lies, these stories, you're destroying everything we've built." But she was quicker. She stepped forward, her eyes welling with tears that I knew were nothing but theater. "I've done nothing but love this family. All these accusations. They're paranoid ramblings. Everyone knows you've been struggling. Maybe you should see a doctor." Her voice dripped with false concern, but every syllable was designed to corner me, to paint me as weak and senile. For the first time, I saw the depth of her cunning. I stood taller, refusing to let the tide sweep me away. "Enough," I said, my voice steady, slicing through their chaos. "I may be old, but I am not blind. I know what you've done. I will not stay silent any longer. I will fight for what's mine, for this family's name." The words carried more power than I expected. For a moment, even my son stopped pacing. He stared at me, his anger colliding with something else, doubt, but her hand touched his arm, and the moment was gone. The silence was broken by the pounding of my own heartbeat, loud enough that I thought they might hear it. My declaration hung in the air, sharper than any weapon. The confrontation spilled onto the porch. Neighbors' lights flicked on, curious eyes peering through blinds. My son's face was red, his fists clenched. "Back down, Dad," he spat, his voice cracking in the humid night. "Or I'll make sure you're cut off for good. You'll be nothing to us." Nothing. His wife leaned closer to him, whispering words I couldn't hear, but her smirk told me enough. She was stoking the flames, fueling his rage until he was ready to burn every bridge. The tension pressed down like a storm ready to break. Even the cicadas outside seemed to quiet, waiting for the thunder. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. They stormed off into the night, leaving me standing alone on the porch. The house behind me echoed with betrayal. The silence was heavy, pressing against my chest, but it carried no defeat. "They think they've silenced me," I whispered into the dark, the words tasting like steel. "But they have no idea what I'm prepared to reveal next." I turned back into the house, the floorboards creaking beneath my steps. Tonight, the battle had been words. Tomorrow, it would be something far greater. The office was dim, only the yellow glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows over the piles of paper spread before me. The sound of crickets outside was broken only by the rustle of old files. My hands, worn with age, worked steadily through the records I had kept over decades. Tax returns, loan agreements, bank papers. They had always been there, quietly stored, and tonight they carried the weight of justice. At first, the pages blurred together, numbers and lines smudged with time. Then, in the corner of one folder, I noticed it, a signature, my own name, but it wasn't mine. The strokes were too neat, too modern, missing the slight tremor of my hand. A chill ran down my spine. But it wasn't fear, it was clarity. My daughter-in-law had forged documents to take what I had built. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was fact. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that piece of paper, the evidence glowing under the lamp. The silence in the house seemed to grow louder. Rage simmered, but so did determination. If they thought I was powerless, they had just given me the proof that would undo them. The next day, I drove across town to an old friend's house. David had been an accountant all his life, sharp-minded even in retirement. When I handed him the folder, he adjusted his glasses and studied the pages. His eyes narrowed, his lips tightening as he flipped through the papers. "This isn't your signature," he said flatly, tapping the corner of the page. "And this one here, it's been traced. They didn't even bother to hide it well." Hearing it confirmed by a professional was like having a shield strapped to my chest. The weight I had carried for weeks began to shift. For the first time, I felt not like prey, but a hunter who had found his trail. "Would you be willing to testify if it comes to that?" I asked. David looked me dead in the eye. "For you? Yes. What they've done is fraud, plain and simple. They won't get away with it." I gripped his hand firmly, gratitude swelling in my chest. This wasn't just about reclaiming my money. It was about reclaiming the dignity they had tried to strip from me. A week later, I walked into my son's house for a family dinner. The air was thick with forced politeness. Laughter layered over tension. My daughter-in-law greeted me with her polished smile, the same smile that had fooled so many, but I saw the cracks now. As dishes clattered and small talk filled the table, I leaned forward, my voice calm but pointed. "Tell me," I said, looking straight at her. "What year was it you signed that refinancing paper? 2017, wasn't it?" She blinked, just a fraction too long, before answering smoothly. "Yes, of course, 2017. And the property deed? That was the same year too?" Her fork paused, midway to her mouth. A ripple went through the table. My other relatives grew quiet, sensing something beneath the surface. Her smile wavered, just slightly, but enough. Doubt had entered the room. Then I set the papers down, copies of the documents, the signatures side by side. Mine, with the natural shake of a man my age. Hers, forged, flawless, soulless. The silence that followed was deafening. My son stared at the papers, his face paling. My daughter-in-law's mask shattered into fury. "How dare you bring this here?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "How dare you steal from me?" I replied, my voice steady, low, carrying more weight than any shout. The relatives exchanged uneasy glances, whispers starting at the edges of the table. My son shifted uncomfortably, torn between the truth before him and the woman beside him. The dinner ended in chaos. Plates half-eaten, voices raised. I didn't stay to argue further. I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken louder than I ever could. As I walked out to the dark parking lot, the air was cool, but my chest was hot with resolve. Then I stopped dead. My car sat there, its windshield shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The message was clear. They wanted me to back down, to be afraid. I stood in the broken glass, my reflection fractured across the shards, and yet, a grim smile tugged at my lips. They hadn't silenced me. All they had done was confirm I had struck a nerve. "They wanted me afraid," I muttered into the night. But all they did was prove I've got them cornered. The war was no longer hidden. It had just stepped out into the open. The morning sun spilled across my driveway, glinting off jagged shards of glass. My windshield was a spiderweb of fractures, 1,000 glittering edges reflecting back at me. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring. The silence of the neighborhood pressed down, almost mocking me with its calm. Birds chirped, dogs barked in the distance, and yet my car sat like a wounded soldier, marked with a message too clear to ignore. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was intimidation. A deep ache settled in my chest, heavier than any weight I'd felt in years. The broken glass wasn't just a mess to sweep up. It was a reflection of the broken trust in my family. The trust I had spent a lifetime building. My hands clenched at my sides, not from fear, but from the rage of knowing they wanted me to feel powerless. By the afternoon, I forced myself out of the house and into the world. I needed groceries. Though truthfully, I needed the distraction more. At the store, I felt eyes on me. Conversations hushed when I walked past the produce aisle. Whispers rose just loud enough for me to catch fragments. Poor man, losing his mind. Shame when the elderly turn bitter. I heard he's accusing his own son. Sad when a family falls apart. Each word cut deeper than the broken glass. I caught a neighbor I'd known for 30 years shaking his head before turning away. Another old friend gave me a pitying look, muttering, "It's sad when the mind goes." The humiliation burned. My daughter-in-law's lies had reached every corner of this town. She painted me as senile, paranoid, even dangerous. The betrayal was no longer confined to the walls of my home. It had spilled into the streets, staining my name in the community I had built my life in. When I returned home, I locked the door behind me and shut the blinds. The house was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of quiet that echoes after a blow has landed. I laid out the papers across my desk, the forged signatures, the bank statements, the accountant's notes. Each sheet was a piece of the puzzle. proof of their greed and deceit. "They want me isolated," I muttered, my voice firm in the empty room. "But I've stood alone before." My eyes lingered on the handwriting analysis David, my old accountant, had prepared. The mismatched loops, the shaky forgery, it was all there, undeniable. The documents didn't just prove theft, they were my armor. Each page was sharper than any blade, stronger than any lock. "If they want war, they'll get it," I whispered, sliding the papers into a folder. "But it'll be on my terms." Late in the afternoon, I walked into the courthouse. The air inside was cool, sterile, smelling faintly of paper and ink. A clerk at the counter looked up, her expression neutral but curious as I slid the documents forward. "I'd like to file motions to freeze these disputed assets," I said, my voice steady. She flipped through the pages, her brow rising slightly as she skimmed the evidence. "Once this is filed, sir, it can't be taken back." "They'll know you're serious." "Good," I replied, my voice edged with steel. "Let them know." With every signature, every stamped seal, I felt the shift inside me. No longer was I just defending myself. I was striking back. Quiet, deliberate, and devastating. Night fell heavy. I sat by the window with a glass of water, staring into the empty street. The clock ticked in the background, each second echoing in the stillness. My body was tired, but my mind was sharper than ever, each thought honed by betrayal and resolve. Then I heard it, a faint scrape at the front door. My heart quickened. A white envelope slid under the crack, landing softly on the floor. I picked it up with careful hands. No return address, no signature, just block letters scrawled across a sheet of paper. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." I held the note under the lamp, reading it again and again. My lips curved into something between a grimace and a smile. "They thought fear would stop me," I muttered into the silence, but fear left me long ago. The envelope crumpled in my hand as I looked back out the window, the streetlights flickering like silent witnesses. They had fired their shot. Now it was my turn. The air inside my son's home felt thicker than the humid Texas heat pressing down outside. Relatives filled every chair in the dining room, voices low, eyes darting toward me as I walked in. This wasn't a peace gathering, it was a stage, and I was cast as the villain. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier, but there was nothing warm about it. I could sense their plan before a word was spoken. My son shifted uncomfortably at the head of the table, glancing at his wife as though she was the conductor of this performance. The unease in his posture betrayed the storm brewing. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, a practiced look of fragile innocence painted across her face. Then the curtain lifted. Her voice cracked loud enough for every cousin, uncle, and neighbor at the table to hear. She accused me of forging stories, twisting documents, trying to shatter the family from within. Crocodile tears rolled down her cheeks as she shook her head at me, gasping about how a tired old man could fall so far as to attack his own children. For a moment, she had some of them leaning her way, shaking their heads, clucking tongues, whispering that maybe I had lost my mind. But I stayed still, my hands folded neatly in front of me, back straight against the chair. When her voice rose to hysteria, mine came calm, even, like steel cutting through fog. Slowly, I laid down the notarized evidence, bank statements, legal signatures, each one authenticated and sealed. The accountant's testimony followed, pages signed, official, undeniable. The silence that followed was heavier than the accusations had been. Eyes shifted, this time not toward me, but toward her trembling hands and faltering smile. Then came the eruption. Relatives began to argue, voices colliding like thunderclaps. Some demanded answers, others scolded her for the lies. And just when the chaos reached its peak, a quiet voice pierced the room. A cousin, one who rarely spoke, stood, holding out a phone. With a trembling thumb, he pressed play. Out spilled her own words, caught in a recording, describing how she and my son had schemed to drain my accounts and secure property behind my back. The effect was immediate. My son's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Gasps circled the room, chairs scraped back, and the walls seemed to vibrate with disbelief. she stammered, reaching for explanations that fell flat against the undeniable sound of her own voice. My son stood suddenly, the chair crashing backward. His eyes darted between her and me, rage and shame twisting his features. Without a word, he stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. His wife was left behind, surrounded not by allies, but by the harsh, condemning silence of family she could no longer manipulate. I remained seated, my evidence still spread across the table, their stares fixed on me now, not with doubt, but with expectation. They wanted to know what I would do next, what the patriarch would decide for a family shaken to its foundation. The morning after the family meeting, the house felt like a tomb. Sunlight crept through the blinds in narrow slits, painting pale lines across the kitchen table. The coffee pot gurgled behind me, filling the room with a smell that used to mean comfort. The mug sat in front of me, steam rising, but I never touched it. My mind replayed every shout, every accusation, and finally the sound of the front door slamming as my son stormed into the night. The silence now was almost unbearable, pressing down heavier than the voices that had filled the dining room only hours before. The phone didn't ring that morning. No one checked in. The house carried only my breathing and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. That cup of coffee cooled, untouched, a mirror of the emptiness spreading inside my chest. For years I thought family meant warmth around this table. Now, it just felt like a battlefield where I was left alone to count the scars. Days later, the wound spread beyond these walls. At the grocery store, neighbors who once greeted me warmly looked away, pushing their carts faster as if I carried a disease. On the church steps, an old friend shook my hand stiffly, his eyes darting like he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. The lies had traveled fast. My daughter-in-law's whispers were working, turning my dignity into gossip, but not everyone believed her. That night, the phone rang. One of my cousins spoke quietly, almost ashamed. "We should have trusted you. I didn't know she had it in her." Another message came from a nephew, apologizing for doubting me, promising support if I needed it. The family lines were drawn sharp now, some on my side, some on hers. Most caught in between. It hurt worse than the windshield glass that had shattered days earlier. That was just property. This was blood. I carried those fractures with me into my lawyer's office. The smell of old leather and paper filled the air as he laid the documents between us, tapping his pen like a judge preparing a sentence. "We can move forward," he said. "The signatures are clear. The accountant is solid. It will hold." His tone was steady, almost cold. I nodded, but the weight pressed down harder. Justice was possible, but justice came at a price. Filing motions meant dragging the whole family into court, forcing the lies into the light. My reputation might recover, but what about the family name? What about the children caught in the middle of this? Truth was heavy, heavy enough to crush more than just the guilty. That evening, I drove across town to my son's apartment. The blinds were half open, the room dim. He looked smaller somehow, slumped on the couch, his hair uncombed, his face gray with exhaustion. The television flickered, soundless, casting shadows across the floor. When he saw me, his eyes filled, but he didn't cry. "Dad," he whispered. His voice cracked. "I don't know who I am anymore." The words pierced deeper than any lie his wife had spread. I sat across from him, leaning forward. No lecture, no anger, just the weight of truth between us. "You believed her because you wanted to. But wanting doesn't change what's real. Now you've got to decide who you'll be when the truth stands in front of you." He nodded slowly, but the silence that followed was thick. I didn't reach for him. Some lessons can't be cushioned with comfort. They have to be faced raw, like an open wound. That night, back home on my porch, the cicadas buzzed in the heavy Texas air. I held a glass of water, staring into the dark yard as if it could answer me. The mail had come earlier, and among the bills was an envelope stamped with the court's seal. I slid my finger under the flap. the paper slicing clean. Inside, the words were simple, official, and unyielding. Notice of a court date, sooner than expected. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the certainty that the fight was already upon me. The reckoning wasn't years away. It was already knocking on my door. The courthouse loomed ahead like a fortress, its stone pillars catching the pale morning light. Walking through its heavy glass doors, every echo of my footsteps carried the weight of decades, years spent building a family, sacrificing comfort, only to arrive here, seeking justice against those closest to me. The marble floor gleamed, cold and unforgiving, as if reminding me this place was not built for sentiment but for truth. Each step felt heavier than the last, though not from age. This was the burden of carrying dignity through betrayal. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with whispers, rows of wooden benches filled with neighbors, extended relatives, and curious onlookers who had heard enough of the scandal to want to see it unfold. My son sat stiffly at the defense table, his eyes fixed straight ahead, avoiding mine. Beside him, my daughter-in-law leaned close to her attorney, her face a mask of fragile sorrow. She looked every bit the victim she wanted others to believe she was. The judge entered, stern and steady, and the room fell silent. After the formalities, her lawyer stood with theatrical flair. He painted me as a manipulator, a bitter old man clinging to control I no longer deserved. Then came the venom. "Your Honor," he said, voice carrying easily through the chamber. This man forged his own documents. He falsified signatures to trap his family financially, all to keep power over them. This is not about protection, it's about domination. A ripple went through the audience, gasps, shifting bodies, murmurs of disbelief. Even the judge's brow furrowed, his gaze sharp and searching. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and thick. I sat still, but my heart pounded like a drum. Lies had always been her strongest weapon, and today she wielded them with precision, yet I wasn't here unprepared. When the judge finally turned to me, I rose slowly, placing both hands on the polished oak table to steady myself, not from weakness, but to anchor the fire rising inside. With calm precision, I presented the first set of papers, notarized contracts and property transfers, each bearing the official seals of years past. Then came the sworn testimony from my longtime accountant, validated under oath. My daughter-in-law's lawyer tried to object, but the judge allowed it. The room shifted, whispers again, but this time tinged with doubt. Not of me, but of her. Then I revealed the final piece, a recording provided by a relative. Her voice captured in low tones as she bragged about fooling the old man and moving money before I caught on. The recording played. Her laughter, so familiar and sharp, filled the chamber. The sound of her voice boasting about lies cracked through the silence like a whip. Every face in the gallery turned. My son's shoulders slumped, his lips parted, but no words came. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable, but the balance in the room had changed. Where once the tide had threatened to drown me, now it turned against her. Then came the hardest moment of all. My son was called to the stand. His steps were slow, his face pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. When asked about the signatures, about the decisions made, he tried to hold steady, but then his voice broke. "She told me." His eyes flicked to his wife, then back to the judge. "She told me my father was losing his mind, that he didn't know what he was signing, that I had to take control. I believed her. I let myself believe her." His head dropped into his hands, voice cracking. "I betrayed my own father." The words struck deeper than any accusation. For a moment, the entire courtroom sat in silence. There was no performance here, no manipulation, only the raw confession of a man who had been deceived and used. My chest ached, torn between sorrow and relief that at last, truth had found its way to the surface. His wife's face hardened, her tears drying instantly, replaced by fury. She turned away from him, as if his collapse was the final betrayal she couldn't control. The attorney sputtered, fumbling through objections, but the damage was done. The day dragged on with filings, questions, and statements, but nothing after that confession could undo what had been said. As the sun dipped low outside, casting long shadows through the tall courtroom windows, the judge called both parties forward. His voice carried authority, but not yet finality. "I have heard enough for today," he said firmly, eyes scanning the room. "The matter requires deliberation, and I will deliver my verdict in the next session." With one strike of the gavel, the tension broke, but resolution remained out of reach. As I gathered my papers, the air felt thick with uncertainty. No one knew which way the ruling would fall, only that the truth had finally been spoken aloud for all to hear. For me, the waiting would be another trial of its own. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long, solemn beams across the polished wood. Each tick of the clock on the wall echoed through my chest. My palms rested against the table in front of me, steady despite the storm swirling inside. This was it, the moment when months of betrayal, humiliation, and sacrifice would either be vindicated or dismissed. The judge cleared his throat, and silence fell over the room. Every eye turned forward. Breaths held. His voice rang out steady, deliberate, each word landing like the strike of a gavel. He declared that the evidence was irrefutable, the forged signatures, the hidden accounts, the testimonies. My daughter-in-law had been found guilty of fraud, deception, and manipulation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. A wave of relief pressed against my ribs, though it was tangled with grief. Justice had taken its first step, but it came with a weight that could never be lifted completely. The murmurs grew as the judge continued, outlining consequences and orders of restitution. I didn't need to hear every detail. What mattered most had already been spoken. I turned my gaze toward my son. His head was bowed, his face pale and hollow. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in a single morning. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law erupted. She screamed of betrayal, claiming she had been framed, her shrill voice bouncing off the walls. "This is his doing," she shouted, pointing at me, her wrists now bound by the cold bite of handcuffs. Her mask of innocence had crumbled into rage and desperation. The bailiff led her toward the exit, but her words clung to the air like smoke. "You'll regret this. Every one of you will see." Family members sat frozen, exchanging uneasy glances. Some whispered their pity for me, others shook their heads in disbelief, still unwilling to admit how far the rot had spread. In that hallway outside the courtroom, I could hear both sympathy and suspicion weaving together, dividing blood into factions. Stepping into the brightness beyond those courthouse doors, the noise of reporters and bystanders crashed around me. Cameras flashed. Questions flew, but all I heard was the echo of my own footsteps across the marble stairs. The railing beneath my hand felt strong, grounding. I remembered gripping my son's small hand decades earlier, guiding him across a busy street. I had always been the anchor, the one holding us together. Now, the railing was all I had. I paused on the steps, gazing at the crowd. This wasn't the victory I once imagined. Yes, the truth had prevailed, but truth is a double-edged blade. It cuts the liar, but it also cuts the heart of the family it slices open. The sting of justice doesn't heal what's already broken. That evening, the house greeted me with silence, the same silence that had lingered since my wife passed, but heavier now, almost suffocating. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and let the weight of the day sink into the empty rooms. I passed the dining table where we once laughed over Sunday meals, the sofa where my boy fell asleep against my shoulder after long days at school. Memories pressed in from every corner, reminding me of what was lost long before a judge's gavel struck. On the mantel sat a box of old photographs. I pulled one free, a picture of my son as a child, his smile wide, his arms wrapped around my neck. He had once looked at me with admiration, trust, and love so pure it could have lit up the darkest room. That boy was gone, and in his place stood a man broken by lies, by poor choices, and by the woman who had poisoned our home. Justice was served, yes, but the cold truth remained. A courtroom could punish deceit. Yet it could not restore innocence or rebuild what betrayal had burned. Night fell. I sat on the porch, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. The air was cool, the stars indifferent to the wreckage of one family. My glass of water sweated in my hand, untouched, as the ring of the phone inside shattered the quiet. I rose, each step echoing louder than the last in the empty house. Lifting the receiver, I pressed it to my ear. A voice hissed low, almost a whisper. "This isn't over. She still has allies." The line clicked dead before I could respond. I stood there in the darkness, the silence closing in again, knowing the verdict had ended one battle but awakened another. The house had never been this quiet. Dawn light crept in through the blinds, thin beams of gold sliding across the kitchen table. For the first time in months, there was no shouting, no arguments rattling the walls, no lies whispered in the shadows. Just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed on my chest. Yet strangely, it also brought relief. The storm had passed, and though the damage remained, I was still standing. I sat with a cup of coffee, untouched and cooling by the minute. The bitterness in the air had nothing to do with the drink. It was the emptiness, the echo of what had once been a home filled with laughter. Still, in that stillness, there was a lesson. A man can lose almost everything, yet if he holds on to his dignity, he hasn't lost it all. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in my living room. The weight in the air was thicker than the curtains drawn across the windows. My son stood before me, shoulders hunched, eyes refusing to meet mine. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Dad, I was blind. She told me you were trying to control everything, that you didn't trust me. I let her poison my mind. I betrayed you. I betrayed the family." His face crumpled. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking anyway." I let the silence stretch between us, watching him tremble under the weight of his own guilt. When I finally answered, my voice was calm, steady. "Forgiveness is possible, but scars don't disappear. Trust, once broken, never returns whole. You'll carry this, son." And so will I. His tears fell freely then, and though part of me ached to comfort him like I once did when he was a boy, I knew the lesson had to sink deep. Love doesn't erase consequences. Days later, in the lawyer's office, the final piece of truth unfolded. My lawyer laid the documents on the desk, his voice measured as he explained the terms. My son sat beside me, still silent, as I revealed what I had done years ago. "I knew," I said, steady as stone. "I knew greed might one day infect this family, so I made sure the inheritance was untouchable." His eyes widened as the truth settled in. My daughter-in-law would never see a cent. Every asset, every account had already been secured into a trust dedicated to the grandchildren's education and future, not for her, not even for him, for them. Gasps filled the room when the realization hit. My foresight had severed her grip before it could even close. Justice was not just legal, it was generational. I had cut out the rot at the root, ensuring that what I built would not be squandered by betrayal. That evening, I walked to the park with my grandchildren. Their laughter carried on the breeze as they ran across the grass, chasing each other with the carefree joy only children know. Together, we planted a small sapling by the path. My hands, weathered with age, pressed the soil down while their smaller ones patted it firm. "This tree will grow with you," I told them. "Strong, steady, and lasting, just like the values I want you to carry." Watching their bright eyes, I felt something loosen in my chest. The anger, the sorrow, the loneliness, it all gave way to something gentler. Hope. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The rocking chair creaked softly beneath me, the wind brushing against my face. The world felt at peace, even if my family was not whole. I spoke softly, almost as if to the ghosts of the past, but also to anyone willing to listen. In life, betrayal cuts deep, but truth always finds its way. Protect what you build. But more than that, Protect the values you leave behind. The sun vanished, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. My journey had been scarred with betrayal, but it ended with clarity. Wealth would fade, property could be stolen, but there was one inheritance no one could ever touch. Dignity, I whispered to the quiet night. That's the legacy no one can steal. My story may sound like one family's downfall, but it's more than that. It's a reminder. Protect your dignity. Protect your legacy. Money can be stolen. Trust can be broken. But your values, your honesty, and your strength are the inheritance that lives on in your children and grandchildren. Betrayal may hurt, but truth always wins in the end. So hold your head high, my friends. Because wealth fades, but dignity, that's forever.